Today, as the data retention debate flares back up, where did this beast come from, and who's going where? Your host is Rick Fagdinger, and this is Liberties Report.
This report is presented by Private Internet Access.
Good evening and welcome to Liberties Report Week 36, 2015. 1 decade ago today, the European Parliament was still in shock after bombings in Madrid in the summer of the year before, in 2004. So the European Parliament was in the process of debating a totally, uncompromisingly, horrifyingly invasive mass surveillance, the so-called data retention. What the data retention law meant was that your mobile phone became a governmental tracking device that was always on. It was an intrusion never before heard of. And in the panic following the Madrid bombings and over hawkish pressure, the European Parliament would eventually approve this data retention law on December 14, 2005. It wasn't until 9 years later that the European Court of Justice said that this law, or this directive rather, the data retention directive, coming from the European Parliament, was blatantly unconstitutional, completely in violation of fundamental human rights, and that the directive had never even existed. The court was not content with merely saying that as of now this directive is no longer valid. It even voided the directive retroactively. A very strong statement. This comes back to something called the European Charter of Human Rights, specifically Articles 8.1 and 8.2. 8.1 says that every human being in the European Union area has the right to privacy. Privacy of correspondence, privacy of data, privacy of territory, privacy of family, and so on. This is followed up by Article 8.2, which says that Member States may make up exceptions from 8.1 for upholding public order, fighting crime, and so on and so forth. The states may make exceptions. And these exceptions apparently justified the invasive data retention. But, of course, it didn't, right? An exception has to remain an exception. If the exception becomes the norm, then the original article, 8.1, what everybody's rights were, becomes null and void, and therefore the exception has been overused, it has been over-covered, it has been over-implemented. Which was what the court said, that this is not proportional, this directive does no longer exist. There's a discussion right now in many European member states about this. There's a discussion in the UK, where the executive, meaning the Prime Minister and so forth, are fighting hard for more surveillance, typical of the UK. However, a UK High Court has struck down the UK data retention law, the so-called DRIPA, Data Retention Investigatory Powers Act, probably something like that. Belgium, same thing. Netherlands, same thing. In Germany, in the Czech Republic, and in Romania, it was previously struck down, as in Ireland, which was the case brought to the European Court of Justice in the first place. Other countries merely refused ever enacting it, like Greece. And, surprisingly, Sweden. However, since this case was brought to the European Court of Justice, only one country has actually gone in the opposite direction of everybody else, where people have been realizing that yeah, okay, this was a mistake, we were acting kind of in a panic and we were rushing things, this was a really bad, horrible idea, let's forget this ever happened. Like Belgium, Netherlands, and UK, and so on. Sweden is moving in the exact opposite direction. It is actually implementing, not just implementing the data retention, it is defending the invasive mass surveillance and mass violation of human rights. So as how this will play out in the near term will be very interesting to see. I predict that we'll see a case of violating human rights brought to either the European Court of Justice or the European Court of Human Rights. No, they are not one and the same, which adds to the confusion. Handing out damages in the billions to a member state. After all, they've been handing out damages in the thousands, in the hundreds of thousands, sometimes in the millions, when one person has been violated. How do you even measure when it's not one or two people, but millions who have been violated by professional criminals who call themselves politicians in this case? That's going to be very interesting. Now, the US has nothing of the sort. There is no mandatory data retention in the United States of America. Instead, there is an unofficial national security agency which collects it all anyway, and which was just recently granted amnesty for its cooperation with telecommunications service providers. Now, this might seem a little cynical, and whether it's better or worse than Europe, you'll need to remember that while it might seem better or worse that the United States has an unofficial mass surveillance and Europe has an official one, it's important to remember that Europe has the unofficial one as well, in addition to the above-board data retention. Things are going Orwellian, Huxleyan, and whatnot, quite breakneck speed here. We'll see if this data retention train wreck can be turned around. And when that has happened, let's kill the unofficial mass surveillance from the spying agencies as well. I'm Rick Falkling, and this is Liberties Report. Visit our sponsor, Private Internet Access. Good night.
This report is presented by Private Internet Access.
Liberties Report is produced using exclusively free software.